It started with the clinking of champagne bottles, just beyond my fence line. One of those sounds you expect on New Year's Eve, not a random Thursday at dawn. I figured maybe my neighbors were celebrating something, until I looked out and saw a parade of SUVs ribboned in glitter, banners shouting HOA Charity Gala. And there she was, Karen Bellamy, our iron-fisted HOA president, waving her arms like she owned the county. If you'd ever seen a woman command a crowd with a clipboard and a latte, you'd know exactly the look I'm talking about. She yelled through my gate that the community had voted to hold the big event on my ranch. Not asking, not negotiating, just laying it down like some royal decree. And I'll tell you right now, I hadn't voted for anything, so I just. The morning had started so peaceful. I'd been feeding horses and mending fence, minding my own business, the way ranchers are supposed to, until her little parade rolled in. See, my land sits just beyond the neat lines of her precious subdivision, a border Karen had tried to erase for years. She hated my gravel drive, said it ruined the visual unity of the neighborhood, and tried more than once to drag my property into her jurisdiction. I ignored her. You learn to ignore people like that if you want to sleep at night. But this time was different. She wasn't asking permission, she was taking it. Tents on your pasture, catering in your barn, mayor and local news coming for the big night, she barked. It was all mapped out on her clipboard, with her committee nodding behind her like backup dancers. I told her the community center was wide open if she wanted a venue. She smirked and said, "It doesn't look as good on camera as your ranch." I leaned in and said, "So does a locked gate." That's when her tone shifted, started calling me unneighborly, selfish. I asked her to show me the bylaw that let her commandeer private land. She fumbled her binder and then said, "The board voted unanimously." Behind her, those committee folks started looking real interested in their shoes. She threatened to call her friends at City Hall, so I told her, "Good. Maybe they'll explain trespassing." She stormed off, vowing it wasn't over. Neighbors peeked out, some looking impressed, others scared. Everyone in town knew Karen's reputation. She fined folks for painting their doors the wrong beige, banned swing sets, even forced a family to haul off their porch chairs for visual disruption. She thrived on control, but my ranch had never been hers, and she couldn't stand it. An hour later, an urgent HOA envelope landed in my mailbox. It was pink, stamped official, accusing me of endangering community. Shared land. I told her to show proof it was shared. She turned to the camera and said, "This is what we deal with, selfish property owners." I pointed to my private property sign and said, "Unity ends at this line." She barked something about the party happening with or without me. I told her she could host it from the road. What she didn't know? Every inch of my land was documented. Every post marked, every deed filed. She was about to learn what happens when arrogance runs into a brick wall of ownership. By the next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with pink HOA threats. Citations, warnings, community compliance directives, and somewhere in the mess, claims that I'd caused emotional distress by refusing her access. I actually laughed out loud. I'd seen bureaucratic nonsense, but this was performance art. I added each letter to the barn wall. Every one a little sign she was losing control. By noon, the HOA's landscaper truck pulled up, parking on the edge of my drive. The driver, just a kid, said he'd been sent to improve boundary visibility. I told him if he crossed my line, his leaf blower was becoming evidence. He backed out fast. You could almost hear Karen's voice in every move he made, testing my patience. That night, I dug out all my deeds and surveys, called Carter, a retired county assessor, to walk the fence with me. He laughed. "She's got no leg to stand on. You're gold here. She won't quit, though. People like her stop only when they're embarrassed." And wouldn't you know it, next day I get a tip from Darlene, a quiet committee member. She said Karen was trying to rewrite the HOA charter to include my road. Vote coming Friday. That's when I knew this wasn't just nuisance. It was a power grab. I pulled up the HOA charter, found the line I needed. Jurisdiction applies solely within the subdivision boundary. My ranch predated her HOA by a decade. I laminated that clause, nailed it to my gate right under the private property sign. Later, Karen came back with her assistant filming, yelling about community cooperation. I just pointed to the clause, then to my camera. Her assistant lowered her phone. Karen's voice cracked. and they left. That night, someone leaked her messages to the neighborhood forum, boasting about taking over the ranch, saying she'd make me regret being stubborn. The neighbors started grumbling. Her reputation, built on fear, was crumbling in front of everyone. The next morning, I spotted a convoy of SUVs at my gate, Karen in heels, flanked by two strangers with clipboards and a film crew. She declared they were there to assess the event space. I told her she could assess the view from the road, because that's as close as she'd get. My ranch dog, Max, came trotting up, teeth bared in a big friendly grin. Karen backed up quick, clutching her purse like a shield. She muttered about filing an incident report, and I said, "File 2. You forgot to ask permission again." The men refused to cross the line. Her control was slipping, and for once, she knew it. That afternoon, I hired Neil, the local surveyor, to file a certified boundary survey with the county. By the time he was done, my fence line was legal Fort Knox. "She can't touch this," he grinned. The next morning, the landscapers came again with beautification orders, but I just handed them the certified survey. "If you touch that grass, you're cutting evidence for my lawyer." They packed up and left. Karen left me a voicemail accusing me of intimidation. I played it twice, just for the comedy. That evening, Phil, my neighbor inside the HOA, dropped by with beers. He said the community group chat was chaos, Karen claiming I was endangering public safety, rallying her supporters. I told him she could bring an army. I was ready. I backed up my footage, printed stills, stored them in a folder labeled HOA Invasion. It wasn't anger driving me now, it was focus. 3 days later, a golden foil HOA envelope landed on my porch, just as Phil texted me. The HOA had called an emergency meeting. I cleaned up, threw on my work jacket, and brought my deed folder to the clubhouse. Karen stood under a "Protecting Our Community" banner, working the crowd like a politician, blaming one selfish owner for ruining the gala. I waited until someone asked if she had legal authority over my land. She hedged, said, "It's being reviewed." I stood up. "By what board?" "The one that thinks private ownership is optional." Silence. I laid my deed, survey, and the charter clause on the table. "This property is not, and never was, under HOA jurisdiction. You've overstepped. You've been filmed." The board paled. Then Darlene, bless her, stood up with copies of Karen's emails, proof she'd tried to redraw the maps and punish me for not bowing down. The room erupted. Some neighbors demanded her resignation. Karen tried to adjourn, but the damage was done. Outside, the air was crisp and full of whispers. The community had seen the cracks. The fight was public now. That night, Corinna's silence was louder than her speeches. The HOA forum turned into a revolt. Screenshots, old finds, stories of intimidation, all pouring out. By the weekend, the gala was moved to the border of my land, close enough for photos, far enough to respect the law. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, cameras rolling, watching her pretend like she'd won. But the truth was, the more she fought, the deeper she dug her own grave. After the event, she filed complaints against me for disturbing community unity, for verbal harassment. The sheriff called and told me to relax. He'd seen the footage and said, "You want to press charges for trespassing?" I waited. Next day, an anonymous envelope landed with financial records. Karen had used HOA funds for the gala, no board approval. I handed it to my lawyer, who drafted a cease and desist, delivered by the sheriff himself. When Karen spun it as an unjust attack, the community exploded. Neighbors told stories. She lost her last defenders. The next HOA meeting turned into her own trial. People demanded answers. When she barked, "You have no idea how hard this job is," someone shouted. "Then maybe it's time to give it up." She ran out, face white as the papers in her hands. That night, Phil came by with pastries. The board had voted to suspend her presidency. An audit started. By the time the county finished, the charges came down: misuse of funds, fraud, the whole lot. She was removed. The HOA dissolved by a community vote. Neighbors finally smiled. Kids played where she'd banned them. The office stayed locked. Cora's house went up for sale. A new family moved in and planted flowers where her "Keep Lawns" uniform sign had stood. One day, a kid asked me, "Is this where the mean lady tried to throw a party?" I just laughed and said, "Sometimes grown-ups make big mistakes." And as I sat on my porch, Max by my feet, I realized peace isn't loud. It doesn't make speeches, it just comes back when you earn it. The lock on my gate still clicks shut at night, and every time it does, I remember, sometimes the best way to win a war is to stand still and let arrogance trip over itself. So what do you think? Should people have the right to draw their own lines? Or does community mean following someone else's rules? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear where you stand on justice, ownership, and how far is too far when it comes to power.